The transfer orders arrived on a quiet afternoon, and physician Talus Vorn read them 3 times before believing they were real. Human military attachment, the document stated. Duration, 6 standard months. Assignment, 47th Expeditionary Battalion. Talus was Kelathi, a species known throughout the galaxy for their medical expertise. They stood tall and thin, with pale blue skin and 4 graceful arms that made surgery almost an art form. The Kelathi were calm, logical, and above all, careful. They did not take unnecessary risks. They certainly did not volunteer for combat duty, but the Galactic Alliance had decided that integration between species required exchange programs. Someone had to go first. Someone had to work alongside the humans. The humans, every species in the galaxy knew about them. They came from Earth, a world so dangerous it had earned the classification of Deathworld. Extreme gravity, deadly radiation from their own sun, bacteria and viruses that killed constantly, predators everywhere, natural disasters that wiped out entire regions, and somehow, humans had not only survived there, they had thrived. "You should refuse," said Talus's colleague, a senior physician named Drell. "Those creatures are barely civilized. I have read reports. They poison themselves for recreation. They break their own bones for sport. They continue functioning with injuries that would kill us in minutes." Talus had read the same reports. They had seen the medical files the Alliance had provided. The images still haunted them. A human soldier with scars across half his body, still active duty, another with metal replacements for bones she had broken 3 separate times. A third who had survived being shot through the chest. The file noted he had walked 2 miles to the medical station. Walked. "It is only 6 months, Talus said, though their voice wavered. "I will observe. I will learn. Perhaps we have exaggerated their nature." Drell made a sound of doubt. "Do not let them bite you. I understand they carry diseases in their mouths that can kill." The transport ship that carried Talus to the human vessel was cold and empty. No other species had volunteered for this particular exchange. When the airlock opened and Talus stepped onto the human warship Relentless, they expected to find a dark and brutal place. Instead, they found noise. Laughter echoed down the metal corridor. Somewhere, music was playing. 2 humans walked past Talus without even looking at them, deep in conversation about something called football. One of them was carrying a container of brown liquid that smelled sharp and bitter. "You must be the new doc," said a voice. Talus turned to find a human female approaching. She was short by human standards, with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything at once. The insignia on her uniform marked her as a captain. "I am Physician Talus Vorn," Talus said, trying to keep their voice steady. "Kelathi Medical Corps. Assigned to your battalion." "Captain Diana Reyes," the human replied. She extended one hand, and Talus remembered this was a human greeting ritual. They carefully placed one of their own hands against hers. The human's grip was strong, but not painful. "Welcome aboard. We're glad to have a real doctor with us. You do not have physicians. We have combat medics. Good ones. But they're trained to keep people alive long enough to reach actual doctors." Captain Reyes smiled, and Talus noticed the expression seemed genuine. "That's you now." She led Talus through the ship, and everywhere they went, humans stared. Not with hostility, but with curiosity. Several of them waved. One large male with a scarred face gave Talus a nod of acknowledgement. "That's Sergeant Roy Barnes," Captain Reyes said. "He'll be your primary contact. His squad takes point on most operations, so they tend to need medical attention more than others. They take the most dangerous position voluntarily. Barnes has been taking point for 15 years. Says he likes the view." Talus did not understand the joke, but they nodded anyway. The medical bay was smaller than expected, but clean and organized. Talus examined the equipment with growing concern. By Kelathi standards, most of it was primitive. Effective, perhaps, but rough. "I know it's not what you're used to," Captain Reyes said, "but it works." Before Talus could respond, a commotion drew their attention. A young human male entered the medical bay with blood dripping from his hand. He had wrapped a dirty cloth around the wound and seemed annoyed rather than distressed. "Just need a bandage," he said. "Caught it on a sharp edge in the cargo bay." Talus moved forward instinctively. "Let me examine the wound." The human shrugged and unwrapped the cloth. The cut was deep, running across his palm. Blood flowed freely. Any Kelethi with such an injury would be in serious pain, requiring immediate treatment and several days of rest. This human was looking at his hand with mild irritation. I can close this, Talus said. You will need to rest the hand for at least 3 days. The human laughed. Doc, I got inventory to finish. Just slap something on it, and I'll be fine. Before Talus could argue, an alarm began to sound throughout the ship. Red lights flashed. Captain Reyes touched a device on her wrist and listened to a voice Talus could not hear. That's our call, she said. We're being deployed to Riven 4. Enemy activity confirmed. She looked at Talus with something that might have been sympathy. Hope you're ready, Doctor. Things are about to get interesting. Talus watched the bleeding human calmly wrap his hand again and head for his duty station. What had they gotten themselves into? Riven 4 was a world of gray stone and black smoke. The transport shuttle shook violently as it descended through the atmosphere, and Talus gripped their seat with all 4 hands. The humans around them seemed unbothered. Some were checking their weapons. Others were talking quietly. One soldier in the corner appeared to be sleeping, while the shuttle was being thrown around by atmospheric turbulence on approach to a combat zone. First drop? Asked a voice beside Talus. They turned to find a human female watching them with kind eyes. She was young, with short black hair and medical insignia on her uniform, a red cross on white background. I am Physician Talus Vorn, Talus managed to say. Corporal Yuki Tanaka, combat medic. She smiled. Don't worry. The landing is the easy part. Talus did not find this reassuring. The field medical station was set up within an hour of landing. Talus worked alongside Corporal Tanaka, organizing supplies and preparing for casualties. The equipment was even more basic than what they had seen on the ship. Bandages, simple surgical tools, chemical compounds for pain that Talus recognized as dangerously primitive. This is your standard field kit? Talus asked. This is the expanded version, Tanaka replied. Usually we work with half this stuff. How do you save lives with so little? Tanaka looked at Talus for a long moment. We don't always save them, Doctor. Sometimes we just keep them fighting long enough to finish the mission. Sometimes we just hold their hand while they die. The words were spoken without emotion, but Talus saw something flicker in the human's eyes. Pain, perhaps. Old pain, pushed down deep. Before Talus could respond, the sound of explosions rolled across the valley. The ground shook. Dust fell from the ceiling of their temporary structure. Contact, Tanaka said simply. She grabbed a medical bag. Let's go. Go. Go where? Forward aid station. The wounded won't come to us. We go to them. The next hours were a blur of horror and wonder. Talus saw humans with injuries that should have killed them still walking, still talking, still trying to return to the fight. One soldier arrived with a piece of metal embedded in his shoulder. He sat patiently while Talus removed it, complaining only that he was missing the action. Does the pain not affect you? Talus asked as they sealed the wound. Hurts like hell, the soldier admitted. But my squad needs me. Another soldier, a young male barely old enough to serve, was carried in by his companions. Shrapnel had torn through his abdomen. Any Kelethi would have been dead already. This human was still conscious, still cracking weak jokes. Hey doc, he said to Talus. Am I going to make it? Talus examined the wound. It was severe but survivable with proper treatment. You will live, Private Delgado. But you must rest. No movement for at least 10 days. 10 days. The human looked genuinely distressed. But the offensive is in 3 days. I can't miss that. You will die if you participate. Better than letting my squad go without me. Talus stared at the human, not understanding. Corporal Tanaka appeared beside them, already preparing medication. He's serious, Tanaka said quietly. They all are. Watch. Over the next hour, Talus watched soldier after soldier refuse proper treatment. They accepted basic care, enough to stop the bleeding, enough to function. Then they asked when they could return to duty. A female soldier with a broken arm demanded a splint and nothing more. She was back with her unit within hours. A male soldier with burns across his back refused pain medication because it might slow his reflexes. Another soldier, shot through the thigh, asked only for the bullet to be removed and the wound sealed. He limped back toward the front lines before Talus could stop him. This is madness, Talus said to Tanaka. They will cause permanent damage to themselves. Maybe, Tanaka agreed. But they won't abandon their friends. Their friends would understand. Surely their commanders would not expect such sacrifice. Tanaka laughed, but it was a sad sound. Doctor, our commanders are the same way. Colonel Morrison took a bullet last year. Finished the battle before he let anyone treat him. She paused. Humans are social creatures. We need our pack, our tribe. Dying alone, letting others fight without us. That's worse than any wound. Night fell over Riven. 4, and the fighting paused. Talus stood outside the medical station, looking up at unfamiliar stars. Their mind was spinning with everything they had witnessed. Sergeant Barnes appeared beside them. His arm was in a sling, and blood had dried on his forehead. He had refused treatment twice already. Rough first day, he asked. I do not understand your species, Talus admitted. Barnes nodded slowly. Fair enough. We don't always understand ourselves. He looked out at the darkness where the enemy waited. Tomorrow we advance. You'll see worse. Talus shuddered. I do not see how that is possible. The human smiled grimly. Stick with us, document. You'll learn. Somewhere in the distance, an explosion lit the sky, and Talus realized with growing certainty that everything they thought they knew about medicine was about to change. The offensive began before sunrise. Talus moved with the human soldiers through gray mist and broken terrain. They carried a medical pack on their back and fear in their heart. Every instinct told them to run, to hide, to find safety. But Corporal Tanaka was beside them, calm and steady, and the humans around them moved forward like water flowing downhill. Stay low, Tanaka whispered. Stay close. The first shots came from somewhere ahead. Bright flashes of energy. The crack of human projectile weapons in response. Soldiers around Talus began to move faster, their bodies changing in ways the Kelethi physician had only read about. Adrenaline. Talus had studied the human chemical response to danger. In theory, it was fascinating. A natural drug produced by the body that increased speed, strength, and pain tolerance. It allowed humans to perform physical feats that should be impossible. It had helped their ancestors survive a world that wanted to kill them. In practice, watching it happen was terrifying. The soldier in front of Talus was hit in the arm. The impact spun him around, blood spraying from the wound. Any other species would have collapsed, would have screamed, would have needed immediate evacuation. This human grunted, looked at his arm, and kept moving forward. Contact right, someone shouted. Talus found themselves pressed against a large rock, while weapons fire crackled overhead. Tanaka was already moving, crawling toward a fallen soldier 20 meters away. Without thinking, Talus followed. The wounded human was Specialist Anna Kruger. Talus remembered her from the ship. She had smiled at them once in the corridor. Now she lay in a pool of her own blood, her leg torn open by an explosion. Kruger, stay with me, Tanaka said, already working on the wound. My weapon, Kruger gasped. Where's my weapon? Forget the weapon. We need to stop this bleeding. Can't leave it. Can't let them take it. Kruger was trying to rise, trying to search for the heavy gun that had been thrown from her hands. Her eyes were wild but focused. Squad needs the suppressive fire. Talus stared in disbelief. The human was dying. Her leg was destroyed, and she was worried about her weapon. I have it, another soldier called out. He had retrieved the gun and was already firing it at the enemy position. Focus on getting better, Kruger. We got you covered. Only then did Kruger relax slightly. Only then did she allow Talus to work on her wound. The surgery happened in a crater while bullets flew overhead. Talus used techniques they had never imagined using outside a sterile hospital. Tanaka handed them tools and held Kruger still. The human soldier remained conscious throughout, biting down on a piece of leather to keep from screaming. She needs evacuation, Talus said when the bleeding was finally controlled. Immediately. Evac is 2 kilometers back, Tanaka replied. And we're still advancing. Then we must carry her. That's the plan. For soldiers appeared without being asked. They lifted Kruger onto a makeshift stretcher and began moving back toward the rear lines. The enemy fire intensified. One of the carriers was hit in the shoulder. He stumbled but did not fall. Did not drop his corner of the stretcher. Keep moving, he growled through clenched teeth. Don't stop for anything. Talus watched them go, then turned back to the battle. More wounded needed help. The advance continued to by midday. Talus had treated 16 soldiers. 7 of them returned to the fight. The others were carried back by their companions. None left behind, none abandoned. The humans took casualties to save their wounded. They risked death to bring back their fallen. Why? Talus asked Sergeant Barnes during a brief pause in the fighting. The human was bleeding from a cut on his face. He had refused treatment twice. Why what? Why do you retrieve everyone? The tactical cost is enormous. Other militaries would accept losses and continue the mission. Barnes looked at Talus with something unreadable in his eyes. We don't leave people behind, document ever. But surely sometimes it is necessary. Sometimes the mission requires sacrifice. The mission is the people. Barnes checked his weapon and prepared to move forward again. Everything else is just geography. The advance reached its objective by evening. A hill overlooking the enemy position. The humans dug in and prepared for the counterattack they knew would come. Talus worked through the night, treating wounds by the light of chemical glow sticks. Tanaka worked beside them, tireless and steady. Around them, soldiers who should have been in hospital beds stood guard, watched for enemies, protected their wounded. Just before dawn, Sergeant Barnes appeared with news. Intelligence says the enemy is holding prisoners, he said. Alliance personnel, including Kelathi civilians. Talus felt cold wash through their body. Kelathi? Here, captured from a transport 3 weeks ago. They're being held in a compound about 50 kilometers north. Barnes paused. We're going to get them. That territory is heavily defended. The casualties would be significant. Barnes smiled, and for the first time, Talus saw something in that smile that they recognized. Something fierce and protective. Doc, those are innocent people being held by the enemy. We're going to get them back. He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world, like there was no other option. And watching the humans around them prepare for another battle, Talus began to understand that for these strange, terrifying, wonderful creatures, there truly was no other option. Talus volunteered for the rescue mission. The words left their mouth before they could stop them. Every Kelathi instinct screamed that this was foolish, dangerous, and completely unnecessary. A physician should remain in safety, ready to treat the wounded when they returned. A physician should not walk into enemy territory with nothing but a medical kit and borrowed courage. But Talus had watched these humans bleed for each other, had seen them carry their wounded through fire, had witnessed their absolute refusal to abandon anyone. How could they do any less? Sergeant Barnes looked surprised when Talus spoke up. Then he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Glad to have you. Documents stay close to me. The mission team was small. 20 soldiers, handpicked for skill and experience. Corporal Tanaka was among them. So was Private Delgado, who should still have been recovering from his abdominal wounds. When Talus protested, Delgado just shrugged. My squad is going, he said. So I'm going. They moved through darkness, silent as shadows. The enemy compound was a collection of reinforced buildings surrounded by walls and guard towers. Intelligence said 12 Kelathi civilians were being held inside. The rescue would need to be fast. 30 minutes, Captain Reyes whispered during the final briefing. We get in, we get the prisoners, we get out. Transports will be waiting at extraction point Beta. What if we encounter heavy resistance? Someone asked. We go through it. The assault began with controlled explosions that took out the guard towers. Then the humans were moving, flowing over the walls like a wave. Talus ran with them, heart pounding, for arms clutching the medical bag. Inside the compound, everything was chaos. Weapons fire, shouting, the flash of explosions. Talus stayed close to Barnes, watching the sergeant move with lethal precision. The humans worked as a single organism, covering each other, advancing together. They found the prisoners in a basement cell. 12 Kelathi, thin and frightened, huddled together in the darkness. When the door burst open, they screamed. It's okay, Talus called out in the Kelathi language. We are here to rescue you. These humans are friends. The prisoners stared at the human soldiers with terror in their eyes. They had heard the stories. They knew what deathworlders were supposed to be. Please, Talus continued. Trust me. They will protect you. One of the prisoners, an elderly female, rose slowly to her feet. You serve with them? I do. They are. Talus paused, searching for words. They are not what we believed. The extraction began. Human soldiers formed a protective ring around the Kelathi civilians. They moved quickly through the compound, heading for the exit. The enemy was regrouping, and gunfire began to intensify. That was when Private Amy Chun did something Talus would never forget. A young Kelathi child had fallen behind, frozen with fear in the middle of the courtyard. Enemy fire was cutting through the air. The child was directly in the path of danger. Chun broke from formation without hesitation. She sprinted toward the child, grabbing them and rolling behind cover just as an explosion tore through the ground where they had been standing. The blast caught Chin in the back. She fell, the child clutched protectively in her arms. Talus ran to them without thinking. Chun was badly wounded. Shrapnel had torn through her armor, embedding in her spine and organs. Blood was everywhere. The child was unharmed, still held against Chin's chest. "Get the kid out," Chin gasped. "Don't worry about me. I am not leaving you," Talus said, already working on the wounds. "Doc, there's no time. Enemy reinforcements coming. You need to move." Around them, the battle raged. Humans were holding a perimeter, fighting to give Talus time to work. More soldiers were being wounded. The situation was deteriorating. Talus made a decision. Using techniques from both Kelethi precision medicine and human field surgery, they stabilized Chun enough to be moved. It was rough. It was imperfect. It might not work, but it was better than leaving her behind. "I need help here," Talus called out. Barnes and another soldier appeared instantly. They lifted Chun between them and began moving toward the exit. Talus carried the Kelethi child, running alongside. The extraction point was 500 meters away. Enemy fire followed them the entire distance. 3 more humans were wounded in the final sprint. But they kept moving. They kept fighting. When the transports finally lifted off, Talus counted heads. All 12 Kelethi civilians were aboard. All 20 human soldiers were accounted for. 4 were seriously wounded. 3 would need extensive surgery, but everyone was alive. Everyone had made it out. Chun lay on the floor of the transport, barely conscious. Talus worked on her wounds while the aircraft shook through enemy fire. At some point, the Kelethi child approached and took Chin's hand. "Thank you," the child whispered in broken common. "Thank you for saving me." Chin smiled weakly. "Worth it," she said. "Totally worth it." Talus looked around the transport. At the wounded humans. At the rescued civilians. At soldiers who were already checking on each other, making sure everyone was okay. For the first time since joining the battalion, Talus felt like they truly understood. These humans were not monsters. They were not primitives. They were protectors, and Talus was proud to serve beside them. Private Amy Chun survived. Talus spent 14 hours in surgery, using every technique they knew. Kelethi precision, human determination, something new that was neither in both. When it was finally over, Chin was stable. She would need months of rehabilitation. She might never walk properly again, but she would live. The other humans celebrated like they had won a war. "You did it, Doc," Sergeant Barnes said, slapping Talus on the back with enough force to make them stumble. "You saved her. I performed surgery. The outcome was uncertain. She's alive. That's all that matters." The following days were quiet. The battalion had returned to the Relentless for resupply and recovery. No new missions came. It gave Talus time to think. Time to process everything they had witnessed. One evening, they found themselves in the ship's common area, surrounded by human soldiers. The atmosphere was warm and loud. Someone was playing music. Others were playing games that involved throwing small objects at targets. Corporal Tanaka sat beside Talus, explaining something called darts. "You aim for the center," she said. "Highest points. But everyone seems to be missing the center deliberately. That's because we're betting on specific sections. It's more fun when there's stakes." Talus watched the humans interact with growing fascination. They touched each other constantly. Slaps on the back, hands on shoulders, quick embraces. Physical contact that would be considered intrusive in Kelethi culture was apparently normal here. "May I ask you something?" Talus said to Tanaka. "Of course. Why do you do this?" "The fighting. The sacrifice. You could have safer lives." Tanaka was quiet for a moment. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about our ancestors. They survived earthquakes, tsunamis, wars. They protected their villages even when they knew they might die." She smiled softly. "I think that's just who we are. We protect our people, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. But the Alliance species you rescue are not your people. They are now." Later that week, there was a memorial service. 4 soldiers had died in the rescue operation. Their bodies had been recovered, brought back to the ship. Now the entire battalion gathered in the main cargo bay, standing in neat rows, heads bowed. Talus stood among them. Feeling like an intruder at something sacred, Captain Reyes spoke first. Her voice was steady, but Talus could see moisture in her eyes. Corporal David Wilson. Private First Class Maria Santos. Specialist Robert Kim. Lance Corporal Jennifer O'Brien. She paused after each name, letting them hang in the air. They gave their lives so that others might live. They ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. They are heroes, not because they killed enemies, not because they were brave, because they loved their fellow soldiers more than they feared death. Around Talus, humans were crying openly. Soldiers who had faced enemy fire without flinching now had tears streaming down their faces. They held each other. They shared their grief without shame. Sergeant Barnes stood next to Talus, his scarred face wet with tears. "I knew Wilson for 10 years, he said quietly. "Saved my life twice. I never told him how much that meant to me." His voice cracked. "Now I never will." Talus did not know what to say. In Kelethi culture, death was treated with clinical detachment. A natural process, nothing to mourn excessively. But watching these humans grieve, they began to understand that perhaps the Kelethi approach was missing something important. These humans mourned because they loved. They loved fiercely and completely. They formed bonds that transcended logic and self-preservation. And when those bonds were broken by death, they felt the loss like a physical wound. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was profoundly human. The next day, the rescued Kelethi civilians asked to meet the battalion. They stood in a nervous group, facing the human soldiers who had saved them. The elderly female who had first trusted Talus stepped forward. "We wish to thank you," she said carefully. "We were told humans were dangerous. We were told to fear you. But you risked everything for us. Strangers. Aliens. You bled for us." She bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect in Kelethi culture. "We were wrong about your species. Forgive us." The humans looked embarrassed. They shuffled their feet. They glanced at each other. Finally, Sergeant Barnes spoke. "Nothing to forgive, ma'am. We were just doing our job. Your job is to save strangers. Our job is to protect people who need protecting." Barnes shrugged, as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. Doesn't matter who they are. That night, Talus began writing. They pulled out a data pad and started recording their observations. Not a clinical medical report. Something more personal. Something that might help other species understand what Talus had learned. They wrote about the soldier who walked with a bullet in his chest. About the broken arm that returned to combat. About Private Chen diving in front of an explosion to save a child she had never met. They wrote about grief and love and the strange human inability to abandon anyone. When they finally stopped writing, the document was long. Longer than anything Talus had ever produced. And still it felt incomplete. How could words capture what these humans were? How could anyone understand without seeing it themselves? The orders arrived on a quiet morning. Talus read them with a heavy heart. Exchange tour complete. Return to Kelethi Medical Corps immediately. 6 months had passed. It felt like both a lifetime and a single breath. Talus was no longer the frightened physician who had arrived on the Relentless expecting to find monsters. They had found something else entirely. Family. The farewell gathering happened in the common area. Someone had made a banner that read, "Good luck, Doc," in crooked letters. Someone else had baked something called cake that was far too sweet, but somehow perfect. Sergeant Barnes approached first. His scarred face was softer than Talus had ever seen it. "Here," he said, pressing something into one of Talus's hands. It was a cloth patch, the symbol of the 47th Battalion. "You earned this. I am not a soldier. No, you're something better. You're one of us." Corporal Tanaka gave Talus a human first aid kit, complete with the primitive but effective tools they had learned to use. "For emergencies," she said with a smile. "You never know when you'll need to do field surgery in a foxhole." Private Chen was there too, seated in a mobility chair but grinning widely. "Thanks for not letting me die. Document. You made it very difficult. That's the human way." Captain Reyes was the last to say goodbye. She stood straight and formal, but warmth showed in her eyes. "Physician Talus Vorn," she said, "on behalf of the 47th Expeditionary Battalion, thank you for your service. You are always welcome back. Thank you, Captain, for everything. Take care of yourself, document, and remember what you learned here." The transport that carried Talus away from the Relentless was small and cold. They watched through the window as the human ship grew smaller and smaller, until it was just another point of light among the stars. Returning to Kelethy space felt strange. Everything was familiar, yet somehow foreign. The hospitals were clean and efficient. The physicians were calm and logical. But it all seemed hollow now. Missing something vital. Talus presented their report to the Kelethy Medical High Council 3 weeks after returning. The chamber was large and formal, filled with the most respected physicians in their civilization. They expected a clinical analysis of human medicine. Talus gave them something different. I was sent to study human medical practices, Talus began. I expected to find primitive techniques and barbaric methods. Instead, I found something I did not know was missing from our own approach. The council members watched with growing confusion. Humans are deathworlders. This is true. They come from a planet that tried to kill them every single day. Their bodies are resilient. Their pain tolerance is extraordinary. But this is not what makes them remarkable. Talus paused, gathering their thoughts. What makes humans remarkable is their love. They love so fiercely, so completely, that they will endure any pain rather than abandon someone they care about. I watched soldiers walk on broken legs to stay with their units. I watched a woman throw herself in front of an explosion to save a child she had never met. I watched an entire battalion refuse to leave a war zone until every wounded soldier and every prisoner was safely evacuated. The chamber was silent. We treat injury with clinical precision, Talus continued. We see the body as a machine to be repaired. But humans see something more. They see the person. They stay with patients who are dying, not because it helps medically, but because no one should die alone. They hold hands and speak gentle words and weep openly when they lose someone. Talus took a deep breath. I believe we have much to learn from them. Not about surgery or medicine or technology. About compassion. About connection. About what it truly means to heal. The report was published across the Alliance. It became known as Talus Vorn's account of human compassion. Species who had feared humanity began to see them differently. Not as dangerous primitives, but as fierce protectors. Years passed. Talus founded a new school of medicine that combined Kelethy technical skill with human emotional care. They trained physicians to see patients as people, not problems. They taught that holding a dying person's hand was just as important as performing surgery. The unit patch from the 47th Battalion hung on Talus's wall. The first aid kit from Corporal Tanaka sat on their desk. Regular messages arrived from human friends scattered across the galaxy. Then, one morning, news came of a new crisis. A distant world under attack. Civilians in danger. Human forces were responding. Talus read the report twice, then began packing their medical kit. The heavy one. The one designed for field surgery in foxholes under enemy fire that a young Kelethy assistant watched with confusion. Physician Vorn? Where are you going? Talus smiled, a human expression they had adopted long ago. My family needs me. They left that afternoon, heading toward the sound of battle. Heading toward the humans who had taught them what medicine really meant. The galaxy had feared humanity as deathworlders. Dangerous creatures from a dangerous world. But Talus knew the truth now. The real power of humans was not their strength or their durability, that it was their hearts. And those hearts had changed Talus forever.